All right, so we are going to talk about actions in this video. Actions are the basic building block of games. They're the atoms. And once you know how one action works, you pretty much know how all the actions work, and every action is really well documented. So we are still in the lexicon JSON, and I have picked a random action here. This is the create vote action where the master chooses a word. Okay, so this is the JSON for one action, right? It starts here and ends here. What I've done is I've copy pasted it into JSON parser online, and that way we can inspect it a little bit easier. Okay. So an action is a JSON snippet, right? It starts and ends with these curly brackets, and there are 4 fields. You always need the key field, that is the name of the action, and the other 3 are optional. So the key is the name of the action. If you want a list of all the possible actions we have, there are a lot of them, and they are documented in this document, which I will share with you. So you can see we have core actions. These are, many cosmetic things around the background, highlighting players, teams, roles, showing roles. There's a bajillion different actions at this point, right? And you can read about how all of them work in this document. So the key is the name of that action. The payload is, the set of parameters that this action needs. So let's take a look inside the payload. Now in Ludio, all fields come in one of 3 flavors. The variable or the field could be a preset value, it could be a cached value, or it could be a computed value. And Ludio relies on you, the user, to tell it which flavor of variable it is. Okay, so preset fields are fields where the value is a primitive object. So when I say primitive object, it's either a string, or it's an integer, or it's a boolean, or it's it's an array of strings or booleans or integers, or it is a dictionary with key value pairs. But the point is it doesn't depend on any other variables. You can type its value directly, right? So for example, in this vote payload, the title is a preset field. The type is just this string. These are all booleans. Get all votes is a string. Show result duration is 1 second, which is an integer. Show result delay is 0, which is an integer. Duration is 30. Okay. So these are all things where it doesn't depend on any other variable. These are just hard-coded strings, numbers, booleans, or combination of those things. Variables and fields can also be cached. That means that you have saved the value of a variable in the cache at some prior point in the game JSON, and now you're just referencing the value of that variable through its name. So if you imagine, that this is a piece of code, it means that in the past somewhere you initialized some variable to equal some value, and now you're just using that variable name directly. So you can see here that the actors for this create vote action, it's a cached value and it's master. So what does this mean? It means that there is a variable in the cache with the name of master, and that variable is a list of players, right? It's a list of players who are the master, so it's a list with one element in it, and that that person is the actor of this action, so we're using it for the actors field. So all these fields, title, type, suppress history, and so on, these are all fields in the create vote payload, and you need to assign them a value. So many of these are required fields. And for example, actors is a required field. So a vote action needs someone to take the vote. So you need to tell it who will take the vote. And in this case, it's this cached variable of master. Similarly, the master can pick one of 3 words. The targets for this action is this variable called 3 words. And 3 words is, again, a variable that has been created somewhere in the past that is a list of 3 words. Okay. The final flavor of variable is computed. This means that the value of the variable is it's the result of a computation. It's the result of you doing some manipulation with other variables to create the value. So The question of this vote is the name of the master is picking the secret word. We can see it's computed, and the value of the question is this JSON, which is the result of a computation. So this JSON uses a selector, which is basically a method. We'll explain selectors in a separate video. It's a method, and then there's the parameters that, it's the input parameters that this method takes. So what this block of code is doing is it's saying the question to this vote is the result of this computation. I'm calling the method format string, and I'm using this string, and I'm replacing this part of the string with the name of the master. That's what this block of code does, right? So I'm getting the player name by ID of the master. That's this block. And then I'm getting the list to string of that. That's this block. And then I'm using that string as the input to format string, which will replace this one. And all of that forms the question. So that's how you have to think about it. Now, this will become clear as we go through how selectors work, but you can see that when you have variables that are preset or cached or computed, you can constantly chain selectors together using a combination of variables. So you're sort of working inside out here. The way to think about this is, this block of code is essentially saying, if we were to write it in like Java or Python, it would look something like this. So we're formatting the string. The string is this string, right? I'll format this in a second. One is picking the secret word, and then we're replacing one with list to string of get player names by IDs of cached.master. Close the bracket for get player names by IDs, close the bracket for list to string, close the bracket for format string, right? This is essentially what we're doing. And let's just do it like this. So this is what this block of code translates to. And then what you're doing is you're just saying this is the first argument of this method, this is the second argument of this method, and that second argument is itself the result of a computation, which is itself the result of a computation, and so on and so forth. So that's why this looks long, but it's actually encapsulating a small piece of code. Okay, so I think when we do selectors in a separate video, that'll be apparent. So actions are the building blocks of games. Games are lists of actions that loop over and over again until you check the win condition somewhere. And all of these fields that you need for this particular type of action are documented in actions. And you can go through any of the previous games to see examples of how those work. All right, so that concludes this video. And then in the next one, oh, no, it doesn't conclude this video. There's two more pieces of an action. So we've talked about the key. We've talked about the payload. Post handlers are optional. Post handlers do something to the result. And the reason you want post handlers is usually to handle situations where the actors fail to take an action or fail to take a valid action. So let's imagine you have a vote, but the actor does not press an option in time. Well, then this post handler comes in and says, okay, well, if you didn't press something in time, we're going to randomly select one of the answers for you, and that will be the result of this action. So post handlers are useful for error handling. And then finally, you can save value in cache. This means that you are saving a variable to the cache, or you're updating a variable that's already there. To save a variable to the cache, you use a block like this. So it's a list of variables that you're updating, and each update is captured in this JSON where you say the name of the variable that you're updating and then its new value. And the new value can be the result of a computation, like in this one. So again, we're using a selector with some parameters, or it could be, a string, a Boolean, an integer, a list. So it can either be this preset thing or it can be this computed thing. And here's another way. Here's something else that we've updated. Okay, so this is a variable called tutorial index, and we've updated it with this value. And now the variables with these names are in the cache with these values. All right, so that concludes the video for actions. And in the next video, we'll talk about action groups.